Good evening, Al Rule here, and today we have a very special episode for you. Unfortunately, Candace Owens couldn't join us to give her conversion story to the Catholic faith, but we got the next best thing. We got John. Uh, in case people don't know who have been off social media, Candace Owens has now joined our ranks. But John is a convert to the Catholic Church as well, and he's going to give us his whole story from the beginning, how he came to know Christ, what church he was from or churches. He's going to tell us everything. John, how are you?
Doing well. Thank you for having me on.
Oh yeah, no, it's always a pleasure, always a pleasure. And I like the fact that your channel's taken off. If you're here and you're not yet subscribed to John's channel, subscribe. He's about to do a shredding of the arch heretic and schismatic Peter Hears. He's a heretic even by Orthodox standards, certainly by Catholic standards, but by early church standards, this man is a massive this man is fighting a constant war against the church fathers. He's making Luther look shameful. Anyway, John is going to expose that all on his channel, so go find his channel. It's just I think it's just called Bellarmite,
Mm-hmm.
right,
Correct.
John?
Yep,
Yeah,
that is
so
right.
yeah, and so we got the other Paul here. Dun, dun, dun. We got top apologist Colarafi, and he's commenting on my last video. Which go watch my video about the 1054 schism if you haven't. Romeo Demilio Sanchez. I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong. God bless y'all. God bless you too, Romeo. All right, John. So let's not waste any more time. Let's get right to this. Take us back to the beginning, how you came to Christ, churches in the middle, what happened, etc., etc. Take it away.
Yeah, definitely. Again, thank you for having me on. So, going back to the very beginning, well, I feel like I should probably start before I was born. When my dad was in college, he went to a Protestant school. Uh, he eventually went to Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky. Got his PhD there. However, back when he was just an undergrad in college, one of his professors and a group of students wound up converting to Eastern Orthodoxy. And this kind of brought my dad down a rabbit hole with another friend of his of studying Eastern Orthodoxy a little bit. They got the legendary Peter Gilquist's book on Orthodoxy.
Oh, that reg. Huh.
But so anyway, that will play an important role later on. But so I was born and raised in a Southern Baptist, Reformed Baptist household. So, very much uh, in lockstep when it comes to beliefs as somebody like James White, who we have
Ooh.
shredded on your channel. So, um, but yes, so we had the similar beliefs like that. I mean, my dad was very much one of those, tulip loving, theology obsessed kind of theology nerd. But so I was raised in that every year my family would go to Ligonier conference hosted by or founded by R.C. Sproul, and I went a lot of my teenage years to that. I'm not sure how many I went to in total, but
By Pado Baptist R.C. Sproul. That one?
that one, yep. However,
Okay.
it did have the Credo Baptist John MacArthur every now and then. That was a big deal.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
but no, so grew up in this Reformed Baptist household. We lived in, so I was born in Oklahoma, but when I was a few months old, we moved up to Louisville, Kentucky to for my dad to go to Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. And then we stayed there for about 8 years, moved back to Oklahoma for 6 months, and then he got to become a pastor of a church in Georgia. So we moved to Georgia, and it was a really rough 2.5 years for my dad. It was for Protestants who may be listening to this, it didn't have an elder board. So in a lot of Reformed Baptist churches, they'll have what is called an elder board, which is the church is run by several, in a sense, pastors or shepherds. But
Oh
this
boy.
church wasn't run by an elder board. It had a singular elder or pastor, and then the rest were just deacons. And uh, that would wind up getting them into a lot of conflict because there were a lot of power moves made by deacons. And this is kind of a common thing in Baptist circles where the deacons will try to assert more power for themselves than they really have. And it creates a ton of tension and winds up oftentimes splitting churches and they go their separate ways. But they had a lot of, or particularly like one or two guys on the deacon board had a lot of beef with my dad. And, even if it's just like one guy who hates you, they can cause hell on earth for you if they, uh, if they really wanted to. I mean, they started all kinds of rumors about him and stuff like that. It was really bad.
Wow.
But, um,
Gossip.
yeah.
Just pause for a second. So, about how old are you at this point?
I was about 9 or 10, I would say. So I
Okay.
was very young at this time. So I was not very acquainted with how much drama my parents were going through at the time. They later told me, years after the fact, and I came to more knowledge about it. But uh, eventually, my dad got a job offer at a university. He hadn't finished his PhD or his dissertation yet, but uh, the school knew he was on his way to finishing his PhD, so they offered him a job position. And so he accepted that. I think he kind of wanted to get away from this church, but then also he wanted to teach. He was writing his PhD, writing his dissertation, getting his PhD. So he wanted to teach in the future. So he went to this university and wasn't to his liking. And around this time, about 10, 11 years old, I would say, um, he wound up really not liking being a professor as much as he thought he would. And he
You didn't like
eventually,
grading papers?
usually he had one of his students grade papers for him,
Oh,
but
nice. I just want to say shout out to Wesley Chambers, who I've had on the show, top apologist, great material. Go to his website if you want to have a shredding of the pseudo scholar Michael Welton, which may or may not come up in this video. Who knows? Anyway, continue.
yeah, so we went to uh my dad started teaching at this university. It wasn't to his liking. He didn't enjoy it that much. However, I do have memories of sitting in his office when I was little and observing the books on his bookshelf. And um, lo and behold, the Gilquist book. I happened to see that when I was an 11-year-old, and I was asking my dad about it, um, and he was
It's
talking.
so bad. Oh, oh,
But
anyway.
no, we were talking about that a little bit, and he was talking about his interest he had in Orthodoxy and how he still kind of had an attraction towards it. There was something appealing about it. Um, and I remember asking him if he had the same thing for Catholicism. And he was like, "Oh no, I can't take the concept of the papacy." And that's how most Protestants are. They just can't handle the papacy as a system. Um, but anyway, uh, he wound up getting another offer at a church from somebody he knew. Their church had really needed a pastor, and they had had an interim pastor for 9 years. So this person wasn't even a member of their church, but he was just pastoring their church from them from another church that he was an elder at, and he just was preaching there. And yeah, for about 9 years he was doing that. So really long interim, but my my dad wound up taking that pastoring position, and it was a much smaller church, only about like 70 to 80 people at the church every Sunday. But and
Was this a Reformed Baptist church?
it is, yes.
Did
Um,
did your dad, and you by extension, subscribe to any of the specific, Reform Baptist confessions like 1640, 1689, or is it
uh,
44? I can never remember.
Primarily, the London Baptist Confession would be what we subscribe to. However,
1689, okay.
um, our church was technically non-denominational, but we did tend to subscribe to what the London Baptist Confession said. But so so I spent most of my years as a kid at and a teenager at this church, and it's interesting because I do actually think that this plays an important role in how I think today. And that is, I remember there was a lot of talks amongst particularly like one person at the church who he was very anti-television. Well, he wasn't really very anti-television, but he had these tracts that he would put up at the church which said, "Is TV really so bad?" And it was written by Joel Beakey. For anyone who doesn't know who Joel Beakey is, he is the president of Puritan Reformed College. I believe that's what it's called. Um, but very much a Puritan at heart. But he basically just attacks and criticizes the concept of, Christians watching and owning a television. And I remember that as a kid really sticking out to me. And I was actually kind of scared of that track, oddly enough, because, my family, we loved watching television. But I was like, what if he's right and I'm sinning by watching TV? And that was actually something I wrestled with for a really long time. And eventually, my dad was very influenced by a missionary that the church supported. Well, he's a quote unquote missionary uh, in Italy. So, very anti Catholic
Boo!
individual. But this individual was very anti television as well. And he was extremely against any form of magic. So, not just like Harry Potter and stuff like that, but even Lion the Witch in the Wardrobe, Lord of the Rings, stuff like that was too demonic for him because it had magic entailed in it. Um, but
Wow.
you know, it made me, as a little 14-year-old or however old I was, um, it really caused me to wrestle with my beliefs and think, is scripture clear enough on this issue that I should come to a decision on this stuff? And I'm just not discerning enough, and I care too much about the pleasures of this life to notice. Um, and that was something I really actually struggled with. I never was diagnosed with it, but I definitely had obsessive compulsive disorder when it came to this stuff because I was just way too paranoid about everything. Like, am I sinning right now? Did I randomly make this promise to God that I need to fulfill and stuff like that? But no, I just became ultra paranoid during this time. And I think the way that some of this stuff was being implanted into my head uh, when I was younger at this, Reformed Baptist church played a big role in that and making me overthink things and become paranoid about it. But
Um, just pause for a second. Were you by chance a King James onlyist?
I was not. No,
Oh,
thankfully, my family was thought that was pretty ridiculous. But um, no,
were
because
you
in
King James preferred?
No, not even that. So we were very much in line with. I remember as a teenager reading some of James White's The King James Only controversy, and
Mm.
to me, I will admit this about James White, he demolishes that concept. So yeah,
Well, good for White.
yes. So actually, some good research there for once. No, um, but no. So um, I guess going further on, I wound up going to uh, get to when I'm 18 years old. I wound up going to Bob Jones University in Greenville, South Carolina. Um,
Oh boy.
and hey, well, they were going through a lot of reforms at the time, so their new their latest president had just dropped a policy that uh, or removed the policy that women couldn't wear pants at the school. So now they could. Uh, and progressively, he started removing some of the rigidity of the school. Another example is now this didn't happen before I got there, so this rule was still in place while I was there. But they had uh, a church list, so they had a list of churches that you could go to, and if you happened to go to a church that wasn't on that list, you had to have a specific reason for why you were going to that church, and not the one that they had on one of the ones that they had on the list. Um,
Wow.
but also, their president seemed to have very reformed tendencies. So he was seemed to be an enjoyer of people like what's his name, Martin Lloyd Jones. If you're familiar with Martin Lloyd Jones,
I've heard of him. I couldn't tell you a lot about him.
hmm
Like I know that name is popular amongst people like John MacArthur, James White, that crew.
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
I'm gonna guess he's a Reformed Baptist.
he was. So it's interesting. So he was Presbyterian, but
Ooh, what a
um,
rebel!
yeah. However, from what I heard, he never baptized infants. So I've just heard that. So apparently he was in the Presbyterian denomination, but he never baptized infants. Uh, don't quote me on that. I just have heard that alleged. So, um, but no. So I wound up only going to Bob Jones for a semester, but by the end of that semester, I think I left the school very confused, and I think I wound up thinking about the Christian faith. It's either all or nothing. And I saw a lot of people who thought that they could have a nice in between when it came to the Christian life, where it's like, oh, yeah, I can be a Christian and just live casually or however I want to. But
Support gay rights, all that stuff.
yeah, but even more so, like, I don't know, just seem like they aren't even actively wanting to walk or live their Christian faith regularly. Because I didn't mention this, but another thing that really struck me when I was little and caused me to wrestle a bit was there was a passage in the book of Hebrews where St. Paul says that you have to lay aside every sin or weight. And it was interesting because we had made that observation that there's a distinction between sin and the weights. So we have to get rid of both, though. There's a command to get rid of both our sin and the things that, aren't beneficial for us. And um, so for me, I was just realizing the Christian life is this all or nothing thing. And am I really up to the task of living the Christian life? And as an 18-year-old, I was like, you know what? Maybe this isn't really for me. Maybe I just need to chill out a little bit. And,
Yeah.
I don't know. But
This whole thing reminds me of that song from Oklahoma, where it's like, "With me, it's all or nothing. Is it all or nothing with you?" It can't be in between. It can't be now and then. No half and half romance will do. You know that song?
No, I don't. I've never seen Oklahoma, but
It's pretty good. It's got some good tunes to it.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah. Um, just pause for a second. You've talked a lot about your dad. What about your mom? Like, was she Baptist too? And
She so she was a missionary kid. Um, but she tended to be more so of the opinion of just kind of following what my dad said. So, kind of the good wife in that sense, where it's like, hey, what you believe, I'll agree with you. If you want to go this way, I'll go that way. So I think
you
they've had
come
their
from a very
disagreements.
southern family, a very southern United States family.
Well, kind of become that way. I mean, technically we're more Midwest, but probably the same thing, honestly. But but no, so going back to after I left Bob Jones, when I got back home, my family wound up, or I think my dad had a faith crisis of sorts, where he was like, has my entire ministry been in vain, and have I
Oh,
really been seeking my own my a name for myself rather than a name for Christ? And uh, it really radicalized him when he thought about it, and my family kind of fell into that, that quote missionary in Italy I was talking about. They started kind of falling for some of those things, so they got rid of their television, became a lot more rigid, uh, kind of based. But my mom started wearing a head covering to church, and um, but no, it was just one of those things where, I'm digressing in my faith and thinking I need to chill out, and my family was going in a completely opposite extreme, and I was like, yeah, you know this isn't working for me. And I eventually just kind of started trying to give up on the whole being Christian thing for a little while, and just kind of lived my life in a very nominal way. And um anyway, I would say some years passed like that, where there was a certain degree of me that every now and then wanted to return to my Christian faith. However, I never felt like I could get there again. And so I would just kind of stayed in this very normative, not really caring about religion sort of stage for a few years. Um, but uh, I would say after I quit my job as a manager of a Chick-fil-A, so I happened to actually walk out of my shift that day, um, and it I realized that maybe that was a sign from God that he wanted me to focus more on things of him rather than, kind of the earthly things of making a name for myself. So for a while, I was really I was reading the scriptures more and praying about it. And I really wanted that. You always heard about in Protestant circles these spiritual experiences people had while praying or reading the Bible, where they're like, I just read the Bible and I prayed to God to help me to understand it. And he just opened my
yep,
eyes.
yep.
Um, and I never had that, like, never, every time I would try. And I remember one time, this I feel like is a very important part of my journey, was I read, man, 7 or 8 epistles one night.
Nice.
um,
That's like me every night. No, I'm just kidding.
um, and however, instead of, having that enlightening feeling that I felt I was supposed to have, I had the exact opposite. And it was and I don't want to sound like I'm dissing on the word of God. This is just what my mind went to after
Mhm.
reading all these. I was like, these are a bunch of letters written in a context I may never understand, and this is what God has left us with. Um, and it just further discouraged me from uh, pursuing the Christian faith. And around this time, during those years of kind of abandoning my Christian walk, I had started reading some of these pseudoscience, neo-Freudian, sometimes almost science fictiony, uh, philosophical books. And one of the things that I really drew from reading those was that I felt like these were people who were at least trying to create some sort of practical application for life that would work for any person. And I didn't see that with the Baptist background that I grew up in. It was like you had the scriptures, and there were a set of beliefs you had to hold to, and commands you were told to do, but there was no practical application. There was no way to see how it ought to be lived out in the day-to-day life. It was just do this and this and this, but how does that look in the 21st century? And I really struggled with that because I couldn't reconcile it in my mind and be honest with myself about about the Christian walk being true in that regard. But um so uh eventually, oh, I will say, something that really discouraged me in 2020 was the lockdowns, because I wasn't really caring about my faith at the time. But however, even though I wouldn't have considered myself really a Christian, I was still very much Republican, super pro Trump. I'm sorry to be talking about this on a live stream. I don't want to get it this video removed, but um, no, I was very pro Trump, and I was concerned that I think I was very impressionable, and the people I was listening to uh, weren't always feeding me well. I almost replaced religion with politics to a certain degree. And
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, that can just creep up on you, you know.
oh yeah, and
Um
I
yeah,
think I
it's
think just after the 2020 elections and all, or 2021 elections, it was one of those things where it was like, man, this just feels completely hopeless. Like I put all my hope and my stock in this one thing, and it didn't happen. It didn't come true. So that kind of furthered that desire for me. However, I just couldn't convince myself that, because I grew up Reformed Baptist was all I had. So the mentality I had was uh, of sola scriptura in the very extreme sense, where it was like, most people mean sola scriptura as prima scriptura, that you read scripture in light of some tradition which came immediately after the apostles. Um, However, I only understood sola scriptura in the uh, very cartoonish sense of, nope, you just have to understand the scriptures. This is all you have. Um, so I couldn't convince myself of that, and that's what I saw Christianity as. However, it's interesting because this is where my dad comes back into the story. Um, so he was listening to a lot of Catholic and Eastern Orthodox guys because they wound up being the most red pilled on what was going on in the world, and so it started attracting him again to uh, Eastern Orthodoxy, and inquiring into that more after listening to some of these guys. Like I know years ago he'd listened to some of Peter Heers, for example.
oh,
Um,
ugh,
but
trash.
uh, but no, so he started inquiring into that, and he actually got in touch with a Russian Orthodox priest. And I think at the time, uh, I I had started reading my dad's Schaff collection because he had Philip Schaff. I think he was himself inquiring into it, and he recommended those to me. So I started reading St. John Chrysostom. and I started reading the Seven Ecumenical Councils book, and a little bit of John of Damascus here or there, but he wasn't really my flavor then. But no, I wound up going with my parents to go meet this Russian Orthodox priest, and I started becoming a lot more interested because I was like, oh wow, reading St. John Chrysostom, reading the ecumenical councils, this is answering all of the problems that I had with this rigid sola scriptura that I believed for so long. It's creating an application. It's showing me how to apply scripture to my day-to-day life, and the necessity of a church authority and a magisterium. But I wound up inquiring into both Eastern Orthodoxy, Catholicism, and Oriental Orthodoxy a little bit.
Ooh.
So I was looking into those a little, watching some videos and stuff like that. I actually wound up getting a Taylor Marshall book called The Catholic Perspective on Paul. Obviously, to a response to the new perspective on Paul, the NT right crowd. Um, but it's actually a pretty good book. I'm not gonna lie. But um, granted, he's kind of Catholic answers, like slightly shallow when it comes to his theology. But um,
Well, in all
granted,
fairness,
he's right.
he wrote that a while ago, right?
Yes, that was a long time ago. He wrote that, but um, I think that was like before he really became trad. But um, but no. So I started reading that, and I kind of had that experience that I believe G.K. Chesterton said. Um, Once you start understanding Catholic dogmas, you start to love them. And I found myself that way, where I was like, I became very attracted to the beliefs. Like purgatory made so much more sense to me, and uh, it seemed a lot more thoughtful to me than the Orthodox concept of toll houses that I was hearing about. Um, but it was one of those things where it's interesting. My family took a lot of issue with me not a ton. It's not like they were completely attacking me for it, but they were concerned with me inquiring into Catholicism. They were perfectly fine with me inquiring into Eastern Orthodoxy, but Catholicism was just a little too far for them. uh, of course, once you actually start studying Eastern Orthodoxy, you realize it's in many ways a lot more extreme than Catholicism. But um, but no, so uh, I was inquiring into that, and I found it fascinating, like the Miaphysite position of the Oriental Orthodox and why they only accepted the first three ecumenical councils and all of this. And however, I eventually just started going to this Rocor church, and I think I just wanted to settle with something, simple that I had access to, and I eventually became a catechumen at this Rocor church, and uh,
So
you know,
just pause for a second here. So
yeah.
you're a catechumen. Are there any Orthodox books you're reading? Are there any online personalities you're listening to?
Um, I listened to when did that come out? Like Father Josiah Trenum was on my radar. Um, I think a lot of the stuff though that I was reading at the time, like I had read uh, a lot of St. John Chrysostom, and I remember reading some Bible tracts by uh, Peter Gilquist, which we had at the church I was at.
Peter
So
Gilquist. Oh my.
uh, I think there were some other guys, but I remember like a couple of them being written by Gilquist. Honestly, there weren't a lot. I didn't feel like there was a lot of content to be reading when I was a catechumen. Like, I don't think you're presented with a lot to read.
This was during the pandemic, right?
Um, I would say it was seriously loosening up by the time
Okay.
I was,
Okay.
um, but uh, so I was going to this Rocore church, and I felt like at a certain point, I felt like I was starting to become intellectually satisfied, where I was like, yes, I finally found the beliefs that, fit me, that I've been looking for. However, it never really affected me spiritually. It was just like a mental thing for me. And honestly, I hate to admit it, but I just was not a good catechumen. And me and other catechumens wouldn't always do the best of things that we should have done as catechumens.
Oof. That
But
sounds spicy.
yeah, yeah, I mean, yeah, it was a little out there, but um, you know, it's interesting because uh I did start like I think I wanted to deny that I was having problems, spiritual problems there because I thought, "Oh, look, I'm doing the morning and evening prayers and the occasionally I'll do the supplicatory canons and in the Jordanville prayer book or the Akathist to the Theotokos and
Ooh, Jordanville. Ooh, man, that's a
mhm.
culty bunch.
uh, but it's interesting and you might find this interesting, but I met Metropolitan Jonah and actually kissed his hand, but I
Really?
remember, I vaguely remember, and I believe they were talking about Metropolitan Jonah because they were talking about how he was removed from the Orthodox Church in America, and I think one of them asked why he was removed from the Orthodox Church of America, and my priest said, "Oh, it was because he was too traditional for them." Now, if you know the story behind why he was removed, it's because he covered up a bunch of abuse scandals um, that the priests were having. But
Oh
um,
boy.
yeah,
I don't
but
know the whole story there, so I mean, I won't
mhm.
comment, but not good.
But yeah, so he's apologized for it. So I mean, I can't really judge him in that regard. But I did think it was a little special to be saying that it was because he was true traditional for them. But um, no, but it I think things just started getting progressively worse for me, and I wound up leaving for a couple months the church, and I didn't really have a place to go for 2 months. Like I knew there was something I was missing, but I didn't know what it was, and I was just doing some deep soul searching during that time. And I wound up coming back 2 months later. Thankfully, you know, the priest respected that. I mean, he didn't like discipline me in any way for leaving for 2 months. Um, but I came back a lot better spiritually and mentally than when I started. Uh, but I remember I was actually getting really close. Like I think I was like a week or two away from being rebaptized. Like so, I was getting actually pretty close at that time. Um, but I remember uh, at home, I was about to go to church that Sunday, and one of my family members said randomly to me as I was leaving, "All right, you have a good day. Honor Christ." And he's like, "Yeah, I just think I, should start saying honor Christ more than just saying have a good day." And it's interesting because once I got the divine liturgy and I was thinking about what this family member said about honor Christ, and I started reflecting on that of like, am I really honoring Christ by being here? Am I truly convinced by the claims of the Eastern Orthodox that they are the one true church, the ark, that no salvation is found outside of them? And it just kind of just clicked for me. It hit me like a ton of bricks there in the service. I was like, no, you know what? I don't believe any of this. I'm not convinced by the Orthodox position, and I left I walked out of the church, and I've never been back. I've been in or I've kept contact with a couple people, But
So do you
um,
walk out like during the liturgy?
I did actually, yes. Um,
Whoa.
but yeah, I have not been back since then, and it's interesting because immediate reason that I went to the Catholic Church, I was actually a lot more attracted to it. One reason was because of, believe it or not, Vatican II, and Vatican II's recognition that there are degrees of culpability for people who are outside of the physical bounds of the church, and that there is a possibility that one could be saved who's in the soul of the church but not in the body of the church. And um, that the reason that attracted me, first of all, more to the Catholic Church is I think it's such a difficult thing to live with family who's not in your church and just be convinced that they're not saved because they're not in your flock. But then on top of that, just from what I saw at the Orthodox Church, I I didn't see a lot of Christ likeness there, unfortunately. I mean, in
Uh,
myself or in others, um but I saw a lot more Christ likeness in Protestants that I knew, and I was like, why is that? um I'm sorry, were you going to ask a question?
um I kind of blanked here for a sec. I was what well um when you well just finish your point and then I'll ask my question.
Yeah, yeah. Um but it's not that you know the concept that uh people can be saved outside the church. Obviously, the church is the ark, and there is no salvation outside the church. However, I respected that the Catholic Church could have more nuance to it, and it wouldn't be as black and white. And it was like there are degrees of culpability.
Yeah.
And I feel like you see this not just in Vatican II, but you see it in the church throughout history is there's some nuance sometimes there's degree of culpability for individuals if they have uh invincible ignorance or something like that.
Yeah,
And I
like
didn't see that.
5/10 and yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I didn't see that with Eastern Orthodoxy. It's either I feel like there's very wishy-washy on it. And in ROCOR, I think it's especially um a like hard line, no salvation outside the
Hey John? John? John?
You
Are you
there?
there, John? Oh, hi.
Hey, I thought you went out for a second.
Oh, I guess one of us did. I guess the people in the stream will have to tell us. Um just a sec. So like is that the main objection that you had to the Orthodox Church there be, because you walked out of their church saying you didn't believe in it, but like was that it or were there some other doctrines as well?
Um, it was very personal for me at the time. So, there was that, but then there was also a mix of um, the Orthodox Church. I felt like was too similar to other Eastern sects such as the Oriental or Orthodox. They didn't have a very distinctive mark which set them apart like the Catholic Church did.
Mm.
Um, I was like, if one church has to be the true church, then there must be something that makes it a lot more distinct than the Eastern Orthodox Church is. It can't be that blurry. Um, so that was a big factor for me when in just the immediate context. But
Yeah, like that's something that I often wonder. It's kind of like, well, how come not like okay, like say some Catholic converts to Orthodox. It's like, well, I did some research, I find out the papacy and the filioque are bogus, so I became Orthodox. Well, how come you didn't become Oriental? Because they don't believe in the papacy or the filioque either. And
Right.
um, and in fact, they have way better arguments against the papacy because they don't have the 7th century. Like once you get to the 7th century, it's game over. I mean, I think you can prove the papacy prior to that, but in the 7th century, you got Pope Agatha, Pope Martin, Stephen of Dore, John of Philadelphia, Maximus the Confessor. Like it just gets too good. And
Oh yeah, definitely.
yeah, and so
Uh,
like if you're an Oriental, you just say too little, too late, you know. But an an Eastern really has to kind of binge on copium there, you know, and just
yeah.
dismiss it as honorifics and stuff. Is Bellarmite going to talk about the 2 years he spent as a brother at Most Holy Family Monastery? Oh, of course he is. Let's hear it.
um, but no, going back to the actual story, that was in an alternate universe that happened. But however, I will say actually that uh, Most Holy Family Monastery, back when I was naive and impressionable, they did have a big influence on me because I was like, oh my goodness, like Pope John Paul II kissed the Quran and all of this other stuff. They're contradicting Pope Eugene IV and Cantante Domino. Like they throw all these quote mines at you and you don't know what to do with them. And so that was overwhelming to me a long time a while back, um but no, anyway, I digress. But um so I left this Orthodox church and uh about I would say a month later, I'm in contact with one of the other catechumens that was I think he had just been recently baptized, and yeah, that is cringe on the part of Oriental Orthodox, but
Very cringe.
but um yeah, so we were going to um meet up at a restaurant and just hang out for a little while. Just me, this cat, and two guys who had recently been received into the Orthodox Church. And uh, it's interesting because I don't want to go into other people's personal lives, but I will just share this one thing. So the priest's daughter uh, had recently separated from her husband, who was very abusive, and they were just separated. I don't think they had officially divorced or anything. Um, and when we meet up, one of the catechumens recently received into the church was dating the priest's daughter and
Oh
had
boy.
brought her along with him, and and she had shared a little bit more about herself and some of the trauma that she had gone through when she was younger. She's very open about it, and even certain abuse she received at a monastery um, when she was a girl, and it was stuff that
Was
was
this
kind of,
priest a convert?
he was, yes, he
Okay.
converted
All
in
right.
the 90s. Um, but but no, it was one of those things. She was very open about some of the trauma that she went through. Um, and I think that's kind of heavy for somebody like me who is already seriously discerning against Eastern Orthodoxy to hear, because it's one of those things where you're like, you know, the Orthodox, a lot of online Orthodox guys will present it like you only have these kind of problems in the Catholic Church. But my one experience with it was, lo and behold, in an Orthodox church. But and obviously this isn't like some kind of slam on the Orthodox Church. This is just what happened in my personal life. Um but eventually that happened, we left and all that. And I was attending a Catholic church at the time, uh, and it was one of those things where, um, I just started attending, and I haven't looked back since. I've had struggles sometimes and doubts, but I feel like every time God reassures me, and I have just progressively grown in my faith. And lo and behold, uh, here I am now. But that's long story short. Yes, what happened.
Wow, that is that's pretty amazing. No, thanks for this story. You know, it's a very this sounds racist, but I'm not trying to be racist. I promise you, I'm not. It's a very American conversion. Because
Hmm.
like, look, like you're a Baptist in the South, you go to Bob Jones University, you know the and you think that you probably thought very bad things about the Catholic Church as a kid. Um, um, and like not as offended by Eastern Orthodox just because it's not Catholic. Um, and you make your way in, and no, I'm so happy. I'm so happy this has worked out for you. And I got a question I've been dying to ask. I've been dying to ask this question. Um, and it just because of your name. What role did Saint Robert Bellarmine play in your conversion?
Oh yes.
Oh yes.
So I started with getting on the Roman Pontiff, books 1 and 2, translated by Ryan Grant,
It's about
and
4 feet away from me. Yeah.
and it was just completely excellent to me because he just so greatly lays out um, even the arguments, like, for example, when I started my inquiries into at the very beginning, and I was talking about how I was reading the Shaft books, like St. John Chrysostom. I remember St. John Chrysostom talking about the prerogatives of St. Peter, and he was saying how he even defended St. Peter against those who would say that St. James was greater than he was because he was the Bishop of Jerusalem. And he said that, while yes, Saint James judged over Jerusalem, he says, I would argue that Saint Peter was the great teacher of the whole world. And I remember that really standing out to me. And this was when he was preaching his homily on Jesus questioning Peter at the end of John with, "Do you love me more than these and feed my lambs?" Uh, and do remember that sticking out to me, like, man, he really puts an emphasis on Peter being the leader of the band, uh, the chief of the apostles, the teacher of the whole world. And uh, St. Robert Bellarmine lays out how that would logically entail the Roman pontiff being the great teacher of the whole world today, if you follow the concept of apostolic succession, because he demonstrates, yes, Peter's final see was at Rome. He seems to have presided over Rome at the end of his life. Um, so I do think that St. Robert Bellarmine's, and then also on top of that, uh, the fact that he responds to all of these little arguments that you hear from not just Protestant but Eastern Orthodox apologists today. Uh, because it seems to me like a lot of Eastern Orthodox apologists are parroting what the Protestant apologists of the 17th and 16th centuries were saying. And
Yep.
and
Yep.
I think
In Jay Dyer's video, he's like, in his 10 reasons why I'm not Catholic. It's like, well, if you want to learn about the papacy, you can read Welton's book or Papalism by Denny. I'm sorry, he's not Orthodox, Dyer. What are you doing trying to? market Protestant material,
Right, yeah. Um, no, but it's one of those things where I don't think a lot of the Eastern Orthodox don't think. Now, some do. I'm not saying all of them, but a lot of these young former Protestant converts to Orthodoxy don't realize that they're just bringing their Protestant views into Orthodoxy and believing that they can shape Orthodoxy into what they want it to be. But
Yeah, it turned it into like a sacramental Protestantism. Yeah.
right,
Um,
yeah. Oh, I do agree with Elijah though that Bellarmine was incorrect on Pope Honorius. To me, it seems like Pope Honorius was guilty of heresy, um, and that is essentially Bellarmine's argument that it's a questionable passage. So, but no,
yeah.
Oh, did you have something?
Well, I'm just going to say, like the stuff with Saint Robert Bellarmine. I mean, yes, he can be used against the Orthodox, but his primary target is the Protestants. And like it's like he's read every single writing a Protestant has written. Like he's read Luther, Melanchthon, Calvin, Chemnitz. He's read them all. And in fact, I just want to show you to give everyone an example who, because there's probably people here who haven't read Saint Robert Bellarmine. I'm going to show you what he does on this paper. You see Luther, Melanchthon, Calvin, Chemnitz, and Peter Vermigli, or as he calls him, Peter the false martyr. You know what he does to these guys and their arguments? Boom, boom. That's what he does. Over. It's almost cheating that we have St. Robert Bellarmine on our side. It's almost like cheating. It's like we are playing a game and we type in the code for invincibility, and you're just fighting against a normal character. I'm trying to make an analogy, but it's not really working. But you know what I mean. It's like unfair that we have him on our side. Like
Oh,
it's game
yeah.
over. It's game over. I mean, like it's sad that it's only been translated into English recently.
No, definitely. I mean, I think there's some English translations, but um, overall, it's like, you know, 1700, like really old English translations of Bellarmine that are hardly readable, or, readable today. But um, no, but with Ryan Grant's translations, that was hugely influential to me because it was like, oh wow, all of these, because I started hearing a lot of the anti-Catholic Eastern Orthodox arguments that these guys were bringing up, and Saint Robert Bellarmine just seemed to respond to all of them. It was like, it was mind blowing to me reading Saint Robert Bellarmine and realizing that the arguments haven't even changed after all these after all of these centuries. The arguments haven't changed, but uh, and yet now we have Saint Robert Bellarmine who excellently responds to everything. Antichrist is a fantastic book.
This is his book
I
on
was
the councils. This is
I
his
was
book
just
on the
reading that one.
Antichrist. This is his book. I've not read this one yet. This is his book on the sacraments. So, Dr. Ortland, I know you've been doing a lot of sacrament stuff lately, but be lucky I haven't read that book yet. Because once I do, someone's going down. Okay, I'm just being a dick. But anyway, no, seriously, he just takes all those people, like he takes all those people and just wrecks them. Like he ruins them. Like John Calvin is done, Chemnitz is done, Melanchthon, Luther, all those people. It's now Paul said, "You raise one Bellarmine, I'll raise a Richard Field." I don't know who that is. I'm gonna
Prob-
guess an Anglican. I'm also not the first Orthodox to read, and one Orthodox priest or bishop in Venice hundreds of years had Bellarmine's books in his library. Pretty epic. Does Bellarmine hold that the Antichrist will be a false Jewish Messiah?
Yes.
John, you want to? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, he does. He believes that um because he argues against. It's funny because the Sedevacantists will often appeal to Bellarmine as a source for their beliefs, yet Bellarmine completely contradicts everything they say about what the end times will look like. He does not believe that the Antichrist will infiltrate the church. He believes that the Antichrist will rebuild a third temple in Jerusalem. The Antichrist will be a Jewish Messiah who reigns for 3.5 years, and this Antichrist will explicitly reject uh, Christ. He will not believe that Christ is a Messiah, and he argues that from, I believe, is it Second Thessalonians, where uh, Saint Paul says, "Who is that man who rejects that Jesus is the Christ, but Antichrist?" And so he says, since since the Pope accepts that Jesus is the Christ, he cannot be the Antichrist for that reason, and thus the
And
same could be.
yeah, sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say, and thus the same could be said about the post-conciliar popes, such as John Paul II, Francis, and all them. They can't be Antichrist because they confess that Jesus is the Christ. But
And keep in mind in in 2 Thessalonians, uh, I think he declares himself to be God, right?
yes,
No popes have ever done that.
yes,
No,
that's one of the things Bellarmine says is that he will demand worship of himself. So
yeah, and it's so ridiculous. It's like the Antichrist, when you read it, is not a Christian or doesn't even claim to be a Christian. He denies Jesus as a Christ. He calls himself God. On the Marks of the Church was a game changer for me. I do want to say something about that book, and then I'll hand it off to you. That book is so good. Like it's so small. It's only like 120 pages. You can read through that in one sitting, and not a very long sitting. But in so little, he packs so much. He packs so much, and like it's ownage. It's ruining all those heretics I just named. I'm not even going to name them anymore. But like it just, oh man, it's like that's a book I would recommend to anyone. I've got a friend of mine actually who's actually a member of the Orthodox Church, ironically, and is a raging feminist, but that's beside the point, you know. Interesting character. You know, a friend of mine. She's awesome. But she has a goal. She's trying to read a whole bunch of books by the end of the year, or else she'll read um, a book by Saint Robert Bellarmine. And then I'm like, yeah, well, I'll tell you which one to read, you know. And I was gonna recommend On the Marks of the Church because so much in so little. It's just like it ruins its opponents. You know, it's over. It's over for
hmm
Luther, Chemnitz, Calvin, all these people who Bellarmine just owns. All right, I'll let you say something about this book.
actually, admittedly, I haven't read this one, so
oh,
I do have it. I own it, and I have not read it yet. So
oh, so much in so little. That's what you'll get. Is there anything more about Saint Robert Bellarmine before you want to move on?
I'm trying to think if you know. I think one of the things that really helped me with reading St. Robert Bellarmine was that he is a brilliant catechist. And I'm not just talking about his catechism, which I still need to read as well, but I mean, I've learned so much from reading him. It's like I admittedly I wish that the catechism of the Catholic Church was as clear and concise as Bellarmine was, but
I love that catechism. I love that catechism. It's just so clear to the point, and it's easy to under. That's another thing. It's not like we're trying to read these high level scholastic tracts like Christian Wagner does. You know, Bellarmine is really easy to understand.
mhm.
Like someone who is 12 years old can understand the stuff. It's just beautiful. Now the other Paul says my favorite Bellarmine text is when he wrote "It's Bellar time." and then made the same argument against
Oh.
scriptural sufficiency as the Gnostics and cited some Second Corinthians passages for it. It's Beller time.
Now, I will say, admittedly, I do think that Bellarmine did hold that position that not every doctrine needed to be found in Scripture. Um,
Oh,
now,
oh,
most
he was
people,
partly,
yeah, he was like partly
partly.
Scripture, partly
Okay.
tradition. But granted, that wasn't even I don't believe it was a very popular tradition from the fathers at Trent. So, because there are certain fathers at the Council of Trent who said everything you can find in the Catholic Church is explicitly or implicitly found in Scripture. So,
Yeah. Well, he does give a ton of scriptural arguments for everything he does. And like, oh man, just his book on the Eucharist, where it's basically a polemic against Calvin and Chemnitz. It just basically it's kind of like this. Ooh, boom. You know, it's over. All right, I'm gonna
the other
stop that.
Paul wrecked.
Oh, all right, good times. Are there any questions for John? Here's one from Elijah. Is Bellarmine a mill or post mill?
He is Amil from what I believe. I don't he didn't say anything. No, yes, he is Amil because he does hold to a horrible tribulation coming upon the church at the end times. And thus the Antichrist, he says, will reign for 3.5 years, and then Christ will return at the end of that 3.5 years and will destroy the Antichrist. That's his opinion on it.
So is your name Bellarmite kind of a play on Palamite?
Um, honestly, it could be, but however, it's not. It's just I was thinking of what would be a clever name, and I actually came up with uh multiple different names that I may or may not go with, and I happen to just like Bellarmite so much. Out of them, I thought it was the most clever one I came up with, and it's funny because I remember months ago. I asked my audience what name they liked the most, and I listed them. And the other Paul was one of those who said Bellarmite was his favorite. But
Oh, the other Paul. Oh man, it's good. Are there any more questions, guys? Questions for John?
oh,
There's one. Oh,
oh, go ahead.
thoughts on geocentrism as relates to Saint Bellarmine?
Oh boy, we're getting into geocentrism. um,
Have you read
of
St.
course,
Genesis books?
I have not. No, I've listened to some of his stuff though on geocentrism, and honestly, it's one of those things I really think that the guys like Trent Horn. Well, I won't name names, but the Catholic Answers guys need to step up their game a little bit with the stuff that he's presenting, because to me, it really does seem like there is serious magisterial weight on geocentrism. I think it might be the safest position for a Catholic to hold to. Um, now, obviously, you know, it was only really promulgated by the Catholic Church like one time in history, from what I know. So maybe if you hold to that on rare occasion the magisterium could be incorrect, then I guess you could say that. But um, overall, I think that geocentrism is most likely a position that is safe to hold to, and I think that I need to study Bellarmine more and his conversations with Galileo, but um, I know that some of these guys will try to say like, "Well, Bellarmine didn't seem that sure about it himself," and all this kind of stuff. But I don't know if I totally believe that. But
I picked up a book on the Galileo affair by a guy named Finocchiaro. It's over there on my shelf. I picked it up because I got a brand new copy on Amazon for $7, and I know Syngenis had quoted that in some of his papers. So it's called the Galileo Affair. I think it's published by like an academic press, and so I might uh, get into that eventually, but reading too much Bellarmine now. You know, it's the most addictive author. I ran into another guy. I noticed that you just changed your profile picture to a different picture of Bellarmine, but I ran into a Sicilian fella on Twitter or
Mhm.
X or whatever they're calling it these days, and he has the the picture of Saint Robert Bellarmine that you used to have as your picture. So
Yeah, yeah, he was ripping off my style. Yeah.
yeah,
No.
you know him.
Yeah, he follows me on Twitter.
Okay, yeah, no, we talked for a while, and I asked him if he had read this book, The Primary Source of the Sicilian Vespers, how they rebelled against Charles of Anjou. It's like, what? And he asked me what I thought about Charles of Anjou, and I'm like, yeah, he's pretty sketchy. And he's like,
Mm.
it's like each time a Sicilian hears that name, they shudder. It's like, ooh, Charles of Anjou. And his brother's a saint, King Louis the Ninth.
Mm.
But yeah,
King
Charles of
Saint Louis the
Anjou
Ninth.
is yeah. All
What a
right.
based king. But
Yeah, he was a
totally
base.
different topic.
Yeah, no, he is. I picked up a collection of primary sources about him. I've not read them yet. It's sitting over there. I've read his chronicle by Joinville, my good French pronunciation. Um, it's a chronicle of the Seventh Crusade, and yeah, I know it's a failed crusade, but it's a chronicle of that crusade, and King Louis is um that there's this one point where he talks to a guy from the Fifth Crusade who had been stranded in Egypt and was living there since from like England or France or somewhere, and he had converted to Islam, and like as soon and Saint Louis the Ninth was in the same room, and as soon as he heard that he converted to Islam, he's like horrible and just walks out of the room. And one of his advisors asked him because his advisor didn't walk out of the room. He's like, if you die, you're going to go to hell. And then he's like, well, the only way to succeed financially in Egypt is to become a Muslim, or else you'll just be poor forever. I just want to know why he didn't go back to Europe, but yeah, okay. Yeah, so that's what happened to him. But no, he was such an epic king. Like, there's been a lot of questionable kings of France, but King Louis the Ninth is pretty good. His
Oh yeah.
grandson, uh, King Philip the Fourth, who was one of the worst kings of all time. Um,
Mm.
yeah, no, he got excommunicated. So did Philip the Second, though, and Philip the First. Um, I think Philip the First was excommunicated. I know Pope Gregory the Seventh wrote him a very nasty letter. I remember that. No, but France is always like it's always been Catholic, but it's always been Catholic in a weird way. It's not a normal Catholic country. It's got a very love hate relationship with the church.
Mm.
And like it always has, like from like the medieval era, and who really knows what's in their hearts? But no, there are a lot of devout French Catholics. Apparently, in France, 12,000 people were baptized at Easter. Um,
Mm.
some from Islamic backgrounds, even like 5% of them or something like that.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh,
so
I'm sorry. This is so off top. Well, this
oh
is back to actually the beginning of my story on my conversion, but you just reminded me of that with that. When I was talking about the professor, when my dad was an undergrad who converted to Orthodoxy and a bunch of students with him did, or I think a couple did, but um, it's interesting because just recently that professor's son, who is also Orthodox, he just converted to Catholicism, and he and his wife were received into the Catholic Church this Easter.
praise God.
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Oh.
So the story comes around. Yeah.
There's something else I was going to ask. What did your father think of your conversion?
Thankfully, he became a lot more receptive of it. Um, I think that it was just kind of an impulsive being bothered by it at the beginning because, Catholicism is just, it has such a stigma with Protestants, particularly Baptists, they're like
Yeah,
the worst of
yeah,
disliking.
particularly in the South United States, right?
Yes, uh-huh. Uh, but no, he definitely understood it a lot more. And I think he wants to be open to it. Like, if it's true, then he wants to be accepting of it. But uh, no, it's one of those things where I think as he studies more and I talk to him, he's like, yeah, a lot of this, the problems that I thought Catholicism had aren't as bad problems as I used to think. But
Is your dad still a pastor?
he is, yes.
Okay. Okay.
Yep.
And what did your mom think of your conversion?
She was the exact same way as my dad, where
Mm.
she was uh e- her first impulse was to say, wait, what's going on? Why are you interested in this? And but when I actually converted, she was perfectly fine with it and understood where I was coming from.
Okay. Well, that's good to hear. Well, yeah. All right. Well, we're winding down. We've gone about an hour and a quarter. Do you have any last words to say? Anything you're working on right now?
Yeah, so I have that video that I'm planning to do on Sunday, or I'm sorry, Saturday, uh, where I'll be responding to a good portion of Father Peter Here's book on the reception of the heterodox. That will be fun. um, Hopefully, I'll have a collab with Father James from Verily Protestant. Uh, I always forget how to say this person's name. Potam. It's P O
Yeah, yeah. I
T
know who you're
A.
talking about. I know who you're talking
Yeah,
about.
Lutheran.
Yeah,
I'll have him on,
from
and
Scandinavia. Yeah.
yeah, and hopefully Pine Sap on as well, and we will have a panel discussion on why we're not Eastern Orthodox. So that'll be
Interesting.
fun.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I've had Pine Tap on the channel. I've had Father James on the channel, and if Poto, I can't remember his name. If Poto, if you're listening and you want to come on, just send me a Twitter DM, and yeah, you can come on. I'm open to talking with people from other views. So
mhm,
yeah, come
yeah,
on. Especially since like he's a Lutheran, right? And I'm
right, yeah,
my entire family going back is Lutheran. My dad is he'll claim to be a Lutheran. He doesn't go to church, but both my grandparents, like my dad's parents, died as church going Lutherans.
mm,
So yeah, no, it's part of my history. I got mm, my mom was the Ukrainian Catholic. That's where I got my faith. So I'm
mm,
Catholic because of that. But no, like I probably read more Martin Luther than probably most Lutherans. I like I've read on the Babylonian captivity, the treatise on good works, um, the Heidelberg disputation, like tons of it. I've read, and I've got more. I just have to get around to it. But no, that's
mm.
interesting. Oh yeah, why you're not Eastern Orthodox? Maybe because you don't have the noose. Oh,
Yeah,
oh,
it's gonna be my argument, actually. No,
yeah.
no, but actually, as we're closing, I did want to say something I completely forgot, and I can't believe I did, to
Oh.
mention that really impacted me when becoming more serious about Catholicism was
Mm.
starting to pray the Rosary.
Oh.
Uh, so reflecting on Christ's life in that way, which the Rosary is usually presented in Protestant circles as in a very superficial way, where it's just like you're saying all these repetitions. And however, when you really realize that, I like how one prayer puts it, as we meditate on the mysteries of our redemption. That's what we're doing when we pray the rosary, and I think that really, that's like when it started clicking for me, and it's like the gospel Christianity became a reality to me, was praying the rosary more or regularly. So
Yeah, no, it's amazing how much there are Protestants I know who pray the rosary. And like I'm not talking about like high church Anglicans. I'm talking about like Baptists and stuff like that. Like
wow, I've
of
not
course
heard that.
of course they keep it private. They don't share it. But I mean they even know the power of the rosary.
Mm,
Like it's a very powerful tool. And the more someone prays a rosary, oh man, like this whole week, I'm doing the 15 mysteries. It's so easy. You can pray it anywhere. You can pray it on a walk. I often do. Just
mhm.
it's an absolute gem.
Yeah,
Soul
that's what I've
nourishing.
yeah, that's what I've been doing recently, is taking it in the car with me whenever I'm driving to work and just pray it in there. Like, it's super nice to be doing that. It's fantastic. But
All right. Well, thanks for joining me, John. And again, subscribe to his channel. It's just Bellarmite. That's all it is. And yeah, no, he's got this upcoming weekend. He has the Peter Hears refutation, and no, lots of good stuff on his channel. He's got lots of clips and just a lot of good stuff. Follow him on Twitter as well, at Duncan_EO.
I
Um,
did just change it to Bellarmite, so
oh, okay. At
yeah.
Bellarmite, easy then. Okay. All right. I will end the stream right now. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and thank you, John, for joining. And God bless.